Coming this summer to cinemas near you in the region of Wraith, it is a story of a deranged draconic illusionist in Volcor who's gone too far with their illusions. A horror film that should make you scream and squeal. It is Human Centipede. Check it out, your local theater this summer. Fresh and Buds, right now.
Fresh and
All right, welcome back to yet another episode of Fresh and Buds. I'm your host, Tommy Fresh, and you are all of my buds. And today, I'm very happy to welcome Nathan Crawford onto the show. Finally, been trying to get Nathan on here for a while, but you know what? Life is life, and here we are. How you doing, my friend?
I'm doing great. Got to make it out to an RTN last weekend. Got one more this weekend. And yeah, just playing a little bit of Flesh and Blood when I can and staying too busy.
I get you. You know, funny, this will come out after that RTN that you're playing this weekend, and we can only assume that you won that one. And you just went.
We'll see.
Is it CC or draft?
It's CC.
Okay. A little bit of draft, a little bit of CC. That's what I like to hear. I'm doing the same thing. Now, I wanted to get you on because, well, first of all, you've become quite the mainstay of the Fab community, especially when it comes to your streams. You know, you're part of the Card Guyz. You know, you guys make excellent stuff, and basically, everybody's always like, well, Nathan's just the chillest guy. Love watching his streams. I'm like, yeah, that's awesome. And that's the kind of vibe that we like to bring here for Fresh and Bud. So it seemed like a no-brainer, and I wanted to get to know you and just see what Nathan Crawford's all about. So first of all, I believe I heard that this is your first TCG, Flesh and Blood.
100%.
100%.
First
so,
one. Yep.
That being said, I want to know all about how this trading card game journey that is a true Flesh and Blood journey started for you.
Absolutely. So I do have to put like an asterisk by first trading card game because I did play like some kitchen table Yu-Gi-Oh, like starter deck, you know, kind of like watched the TV show as a kid and I was like, that looks fun. Bought like a $10 starter deck and, you know, like played a little bit, right? But like nothing more than that. That's about like the apex of it for like, you know, the first part of my life. And basically COVID happened. Everybody isolated themselves for at least a year, if not a little bit more for some. And I was just itching for like that social interaction. And I was like, I don't know. I saw an ad or something and I looked up a video that was like top TCGs of 20 something. I think it was Red Zone Rogue or DM Armada that did it. And I basically just saw Flesh and Blood. I Googled what a box was because I was like, all right, what's this going to cost me? That's the first question everybody asks, right? How far is this going to put me back? And so I Googled it and it was like, oh yeah, welcome to Wraith box, $4,500. I was like, time out. Hold up. What's going on? And I was like, when was this printed? And it was like 2019. I was like, it was obviously an alpha box, right? And it was just like, I was like, it was insane to me that something 2 years prior when it was printed is worth that much money. And I do have a history in like investments and financial stuff. And so like a red flag was kind of thrown. I was like, hold up, somebody's acting irrational and there's like money to be made. So my first endeavor into Flesh and Blood was actually just purely financial, just trying to like take advantage of people being, you know, acting irrationally, basically. And I found a card shop that had Monarch. When first edition Monarch actually dropped, it was on sale for like $300-$400 a box on average. If anybody remembers those days, they went for a lot.
Yeah.
And I found I'm from Alabama. I found a small card shop that would sell them for MSRP, $100 a box. So I bought like 3 cases. I pulled what tallied up to like $8,600 worth of stuff.
Oh my god.
I immediately sold it all, and then I was like, okay, I'm gonna recoup my money, and then I'm just gonna buy a playset of everything, and then we're just gonna free roll this thing. And then I played the game. The game turned out to be good, and I've always been into like strategy games, like PC games, stuff like that. I've always had to have like a mental outlet that I can like think about and theorize with, and so um, Flesh and Blood just filled the void basically on all those, the social aspect, the something to think about kind of stuff, and strategic aspects and stuff like that. So I was hooked from that moment on.
Yeah, and that is, I mean, it's kind of funny to hear about the $300 to $400 Monarch First Edition boxes, but you know what? That's just how crazy it was, and I've said it before, especially with the COVID thing, right? Like you would think it would have been the nail in the coffin for a game that was all about playing together.
I thought it would have been. Yeah, I thought it would have been.
Yeah.
100%.
But it turned out, it almost struck at the right time because people were already kind of missing the playing in person, especially like, you didn't play Magic, but I played Magic, and Magic was like, had shifted a lot from playing in person to like playing arena and stuff like that. And I remember missing kind of just playing in person. And then COVID just like amplified it for a lot of people. And I think that's why it struck with a lot of people. And I think you're totally right. And it's pretty incredible. Now, you mentioned that you like strategy games and, maybe never TCGs or anything like that outside of the random kitchen table Yu-Gi-Oh games. Which PC games were you into that might have some kind of similarities there?
I did stuff as simple as like Civilization, stuff as complex as like Heart of Iron, like grand strategy games. I do anything. Basically, a buddy of mine basically told me I like a little bit of a headache every once in a while. Basically, is the best way to explain it, and he's kind of correct. And yeah, just anything that kind of like gets the brain going. I just have to have something, and I don't know. My dad played PC strategy games, so my favorite game of it's like old. It's old for me, but my favorite PC strategy game was probably Masters of Orion 2. It's probably a game that nobody's heard of. It's like a small game, but like it was one of those. I don't know. My dad played it a lot, and I played it. I loved it, and yeah.
I've never heard of it, but I mean, now I want to look it up, to be honest. But
it's old. It's old for me.
But it's kind of funny you mentioned the headache thing, which literally last weekend I played RTM, CCRTM. Actually 2 weekends ago when this podcast comes out. That's the movie magic of YouTube. I played all day, top forward. Qualified, very exciting, massive headache. Tell my fiance, and she goes, "Why do you do hobbies that make you hurt?" And I was just like, I mean, I don't know. I like it. It's like there's something about it. Like,
yeah.
But that's awesome. Now, you're part of the Card Guyz. What's the history there?
The history with the Card Guyz is basically the Card Guyz are centered in Atlanta, Georgia. That's where like most of the original team was, which is about a 3-hour drive for me. So as you can imagine, come like RTN season, ProQuest season, we pretty much attend all the same ones because in an area like Alabama, we're not having 3 per city. We barely have cities, right? So we typically have to traverse quite some way to make it to a RTN or ProQuest. So I saw them a lot at these events, and my biggest piece of advice for anybody that wants to join any team at anything is if you beat them enough, they're going to ask you to join so they stop losing to you. It's as simple as that, right? So I was whooping up on them a little bit, and they eventually asked me and Josh Lau at the same time to join the team, and yeah, the rest is history.
Now, you mentioned beating up on them a little bit. What were you playing? What did you find success with out of the gates?
So out of the gates, I actually played Dorinthia, and that's what I met Josh when we met, and that's when I quickly realized that I actually didn't know how to play Dorinthia. He taught me that very quickly, and but it was the hero that I gravitated toward the most. I'm not sure what did it for me. I think just the fact that it had like a nimble kind of feel to it, where you can commit to these really strong turns, but you can also block out. You can play this like mid-rangey thing. I just enjoyed it. But after that, after Dory, it's been Runeblade the whole way. I've been on Viserai, Briar, Chain. Pretty much, I tried Vincent. Obviously, that didn't last too long because of viability reasons, and I'm a competitive player. But it is what it is.
I mean, the only other CC Runeblade we have right now, I guess, is Viserai. Are you even looking at Viserai right now, or
Viserai and Vincent are kind of just, they're just not it right now. They're missing a little something.
Yeah, and it seems like they tried say every set that expansion slot. I mean, they're doing it with a lot of different heroes. They just like try to give them something, and it's just like never enough, or maybe it's just good enough. I mean, so there've been some examples of some great ones, but we'll see. Now, as of today, when we're recording, we did get the new set announced, which is I always forget something.
Part the Mysteria or something.
Part the Mist Veil. Yeah.
That's it.
We're going to Mysteria or some other realm, that has to do with the mist and stuff like that. And we're probably getting the Blue Illusionist, definitely a ninja of some sorts. And then the third one's kind of up in the air. Are you hoping for a Runeblade? Does that make sense to you in that kind of setting?
I mean, I would always love a new Runeblade, of course, but I think that last spot is probably going to be occupied by Wizard. They had like 3 sentences in the world premiere article, and one said something about a tiger, and I was like, okay, that's Ninja, right? They've been printing a lot of Crouching Tiger support and stuff like that. I was like, okay, I made that connection. One said, hiding or something like that, and I was like, okay, Illusionist. And then the last one said Waning Moon. And I was like, well, that's the weapon for Wizard, right? And so that's kind of where I think the 3 classes will be at, is Wizard, Illusionist, and Ninja for this first set. But maybe a Runeblade soon. We can dream, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a while. I mean, I guess Vincent was the last one, but like we haven't had, I guess, like something, classic Runebladey in a while. But, I'm sure we'll get there. It'll be interesting, though, Wizard. You mentioned Waning Moon. I mean, Icelander did rotate, so it's possible that we get Icelander back.
It could be another one, yep.
She's clearly just wandering around different places like Aria and Volcor and now Mysteria. So it could make sense in the story, but, we're a long ways off from that. We're very much in heavy hitters season right now. Now, what are you playing currently now that you don't have a viable Runeblade to play?
Really, I'm just trying. I'm actively trying to not be a specialist. I'm just trying to like get a lot of reps in with a lot of different heroes to kind of understand the game a little bit more from a lot of different angles is what I'm attempting to do. I think that ever since they announced that there's going to be a lot of heroes like rotating in and out. Like they upped the LL points as an indication. They said we were getting like 15 new heroes this year or something like that. I think that the value of being a specialist will diminish because one, your hero may not be around for that long, or there might be an influx of so many heroes to where like that one hero just can't answer that many questions. Right. And so I'm kind of worried about that. So I'm just trying to be flexible and kind of like have a bunch of tools in my pocket and bring whichever one out applies to the situation.
And I'm sure that's pretty valuable for a team too, right? To have somebody that can be just a good pilot, right? Like no matter the deck. And I'm sure that's very helpful there. Now, I know that you have high competitive aspirations. And, you tweeted about actually, not too long ago about the calling and kind of, if I may bring it up, your frustrations with not top eighting. And I think that's such a natural and totally real way to approach it. It's like, I am putting in the work. What am I getting wrong is I think the question you posed. And you know, I saw a lot of people chime in with a lot of great advice and you know, kind of just words of wisdom where like, you know, it's tough, but what are some short-term goals that you have now that maybe address some of that and then or that you think will make you feel better about your competitive aspirations?
So the number one thing that I want to do, and it's more so not results oriented, because you know, hearing the feedback first, I just want to shout out the Fab community and how amazing they are, because I've always been the person who was just like, okay, if I came up short, like for example, I got 13th at Nats, the Nats before, and I was like, you know what, I got 20th the year before. That means I'm like 33% the better player, right? Because I'm
Mm-hmm.
just slowly moving up. And I was like, I'll lower my shoulder and I'll get there next year, right? Like I've always had that mentality, that you know, that fortitude to just like keep pushing or whatever. But for some reason, this most recent calling, I don't know if it was just, you know, the number of times it's happened or what it particularly was. It just got to me a little bit. And, you know, I went on Twitter, kind of expressed my frustration, and the community was there to kind of like back me up and say, look, you're doing everything right. You just, anybody that wins anything, of course, you have to have things go your way at X amount, and everybody knows that, but you lose sight of it, you know, when you keep banging your head against the same level so many times. So Fab community is great. It's probably the best reason to play this game. But to
Mm-hmm.
answer your actual question, um, I want to take more risk as a player. I think that I have such an analytical mind that I get stuck in, if I play my cards this way, I'll get 13 value instead of 12.
Mm-hmm.
And I just do it, right? And that may not be the most advantageous play, right? There could be a situation where you smell blood in the water. And speaking of that, Reed Duke wrote an article, Magic player.
Mm-hmm.
I had no idea that Reed Duke was the guy, right?
Yeah,
Or
yeah.
one of the guys, you
He
know?
is one of the
And,
guys.
yeah. So somebody sent me the article. I was like, I'll see what this dude's got to say. I didn't know he was like, you know, up there. And he wrote an article on, you know, the exact problem I was having. And the the basis was like he had a tough time, you know, realizing situations in games where he smelt blood in the water and really needed to just push an advantage when he had it, instead of just doing what is the textbook correct thing. And I was like, that makes a hell of a lot of sense. And so I was like, I need to kind of try to do that a little bit more. And it all boils down to just taking a little bit more risk, not playing it safe.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've found in Flesh and Blood, you know, you might think you're playing one way, or the hero wants to play one way, but oftentimes there's a lot of fluidity in the gameplay that we don't really realize because it is so many numbers and I mean, you know, that is I think a great way to approach it, and I'm sure that, you know, maybe it's sometimes not going to pan out, right? Like, because you smell blood in the water, maybe the blood wasn't there, but
Exactly.
you
Exactly.
know, at least you took the chance, and then you kind of learn for the next time. It's like maybe that situation isn't what I think it is. But and I'm glad to hear that that's like such a cool way to approach the game, especially as someone that is accomplished as you, that you can kind of maybe use that to, like, you know, amp up the next step. Now, that's the short term. What is the long term goal for Nathan Crawford in the competitive sphere of Flesh and Blood?
Um, I mean, I've never been like a really hyper ambitious person. Like I'm like, I like competitive things, but like anybody that's ever played a game with me, like I think that I've played every Pro Tour, every Worlds, every US Nats, probably 12 callings. I mean, I've been at a lot of events. And I think there's only one time that I didn't let somebody take something back, even at like the highest of highest level. Like I've always just been that relaxed. Like I'm there to have a good time, number one.
Mm-hmm.
And I just don't want to be involved in like an exchange that leaves somebody with like a bad experience. So I've always just been really relaxed and, you know, just enjoy the most of the game and have the other person enjoy it as well. But with that being said, like my ambition is not to like win every single event or go on like a Michael Hamilton run. Like that's just not it. The reason that I want top 8 is I feel like if I can get top 8, it'll just kind of like validate the work that's put in. It's as simple as that. Like it's not chasing the money, the gold foil, none of that. I just want to validate that X amount of time is going into this, and this is coming out of it, kind of situation. Because nobody wants to like put X amount of time into something and it not return in ROI, not monetary, but just like fulfillment, whatever the case may be. But yeah, I would say that a long-term goal for me is definitely just going to be, of course, get that first big top 8. Been so close so many times. I actually didn't know there was a story, but apparently one of the best Yu-Gi-Oh players in the world kind of had the same situation to the point to where they actually called him Bubble Man, and at every single event, people would bring him a card called Bubble Man, and like he would always sign them. Like it was a huge thing. He bubbled like 20 events, and but then when the first one clicked, he like won out for like the whole year. It was insane. I'm not saying that I'm going to do that, but I'm just saying it would be cool. It would be cool. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's the validation is huge, and that's a totally valid kind of goal, right? To just like search for that kind of validation. We it's a lot of time and effort that we do, and money. I mean, like traveling to events, and
right.
and and then there is a certain amount of confidence that comes out of that validation that you can kind of carry into the next events, and that might be what Bubble Man kind of experienced, right? Like, I can do it. I am not just the Bubble Man. He popped the bubble, so like. That is totally fair. And, in terms of your frustration, I think it's totally natural to have it, right? That you had. But it was after you were in Hartford, Connecticut. And not to dunk on Hartford, Connecticut any more than I've already had. But, like, that is one of the worst places to bubble. So
for sure.
No, I'm kidding. We love you, Connecticut. Come to Connecticut. We're not Ohio. No, I'm kidding. Ohio's cool too, I'm sure. No, I go there all the time. Yeah. But that's awesome. No, I'm glad to hear that you kind of have like a really down to earth view of it, and that you have great goals. And I think a lot of people listening can kind of learn from those goals because, like, listen, Nathan's obviously you're getting like top 20 in these events. You're no slouch, right? Like, so this is a player who knows what they're doing. It's just sometimes it just doesn't go your way. To kind of view it that way is such a valuable way to approach it going forward. So I applaud you. Now, let's talk a little bit more about Flesh and Blood, the game. I want to know some of your favorite cards. I do this every show. Fresh faves. I want to know each one if you're willing to answer, and I hope you are. First, who's your favorite hero, and is it right behind you?
It is 100%. Got to be Briar.
Briar
has to be.
Why Briar? I mean, there's a lot of great reasons for Briar, but why Briar over the other Rune Blades?
Briar kind of connected with me because kind of like the Dory story, right? I really enjoyed playing Dory because of that like nimble strategy where you could be defensive, really push big turns, and Briar just kind of does that times 10, right? Like you can block with 4, block for 4 on some of your non-attacks instead of 3, and then play Channel Mount Heroic and then just kill them in 2 turns, right? And I felt like every single game was like, a balance of like what was and what could be. Do I put this in Arsenal instead of playing it to resolve a Tome of Harvest that I haven't seen that game or something like that? I felt like I was just mitigating risk the whole time, and I really enjoyed it. It was explosive. It was defensive. It kind of just had everything. And the second I played it, I just knew that was the hero for me. And I played her from the day she came out to the day she left.
Well, she had one storied run, I'll tell you that much.
Absolutely.
I'm interested to see what the next edition of her or an elemental room blade would be. Now, what is your favorite weapon?
Favorite weapon? Well, I would probably say Rosetta Thorn, but I feel like that's cheating a little bit because that's just Briar's weapon. So I'll give you a second one. I would have to say Dawnblade. Because it intrigued me that it's the only weapon in the game that can carry something over, other than Tower Shard, but that carries over something negative because it's rust counters, right? And then breaks. But like it intrigued me that it was something that would continue with the weapon if a condition was met. So I thought that was really cool, and people were just genuinely scared of it. Like you would present it with something, and they would panic and overblock or not respect it, and then find out, whatever the case may be. But that'd probably be my favorite weapon if we discounted Rosetta Thorn.
We won't totally discount Rosetta Thorn. Now that we've had some time away from Rosetta Thorn, we can look back fondly. But,
Yeah.
only so many two and twos you could take. But both great answers. Now, what is your favorite equipment?
That one's a little tougher, but I would have to say, I mean, either Grasp of the Arknight or probably Snapdragon Scalers, because Creepers was cool.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, oh man, it's the tough between those. I'd have to go with Snapdragons though, because it was so simple, but yet complex. Because when you used it, like you would have a snatch that you think's gonna hit. Do you gamble and go ahead and snap it when you don't know what you're gonna draw? Like there was so many decisions involved in that simple, what seemed just so simple, by just giving an attack go again, and it was just flexible. I just loved everything about it.
That's a great answer. I do love Snapdragons, and I will be honest with you. I think that my last game at this past RTN that I played was against Michael Fang. If I cracked my Snapdragons, I had a decent shot of winning, but I chose to save it. I thought I was going to get better value out of it, and that's the blood in the water thing, right?
Exactly.
It goes back to that, and and it's going to haunt me, but that's all right. I got the qualification, but it's such a cool card in that way, because you're like, that is a great example of when to know when the blood in the water is.
Exactly
what you're talking about. Now, what's your favorite card you throw in your deck? This could be a non-attack action, attack action. We have blocks now, items, all kinds of stuff, reactions. Which one?
I mean, my favorite card in the history of Flesh and Blood is not playable right now because it's Rites of Replenishment, which is a Briar exclusive because it's an Elemental Runeblade card. But there was a game at the second Indianapolis Calling where I was on a Channel Mount Heroic Briar list, and then it was when Life Gain Oldham was rampant. Everybody hated it. And I had a stream game, and I actually fatigued the fatigue deck with that card. And everybody was like, oh, I never thought about that. And, like, it was just really cool. And so Rites of Replenishment got to be my favorite card.
That's a great answer. I don't think anybody's ever answered that one on the show. But that is a good example of kind of like, I remember that era of Flesh and Blood where deck building wasn't super explored, right? Where people weren't seeing the modality of certain cards and stuff like that, and certain decks and what they could do. And I think we're getting closer to like a golden age of that right now. Like,
right.
You sit across Dorinthia, for example. What Dorinthia is it going to be? It could be Decimator, yada yada yada, and a lot of decks are like that. Which that's a really cool card to say. I mean, we saw Briar leave the format with a really rogue build by Charles Dunn. Right. So like it's really neat. Now those are some good faves. We get a couple Briar fans on, but that was a unique Briar fan perspective, Nathan. Thank you for that. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Now that we the distance between us and Briar has been long enough that we can appreciate these Briar fans.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, I want to talk a little bit about drafts, because you recently just 9-0'd your draft RTN, which is awesome. Congrats. Um,
Thank you.
I got to give a shout out to William from Table Pit, who asked the listener question, can you describe draft in 5 words or less? And I said, how about I just make it more of a topic that we could talk about rather than just 5 words? He said that it would be funny if I still made it the main topic, but only made you use 5 words. But we're not going to do that. I want to know some of your opinions on this draft format because I'm personally really loving it. And obviously you did very well at this last RTN with it. How are you liking this draft format? Heavy hitters, I should say.
Well, I'm a fan of Williams, so I got to placate to him a little bit. Draft in 5 words or less has got to be most with what you got. And it literally boils down to that. You can make what you think is a min-max decision, but so many other people can influence whether that is a min or max decision, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm really enjoying heavy hitters. I was not the biggest fan of bright lights. It just, for me, it was just boring because when you finally got good at it, it was like, okay, I'm building my deck, and how do I beat fatigue?
Mm-hmm.
And that's like it, right? It's like, how do I win the game and not get fatigued? And if you solve one, you kind of solve the other. And it just didn't do it for me. And Outsiders was somewhat similar, but it was a lot more offensively executed, right?
Mm-hmm.
It was more, I got you on the rope, so I'm forcing you to block, and then you run out of cards kind of situation, instead of it just being the game plan from the moment you draw your cards. That's obviously not the case with heavy hitters, so I'm really enjoying it. Yeah, I think there's a lot of unexplored things that people are, either have a lot of bias walking into it that's kind of doing them a disservice, or they are not respecting it enough.
Yeah, absolutely. I've seen some interesting opinions on it, but I think the biggest difference between this and like previous sets, I think is maybe a complaint for some people, but I think it's actually quite brilliant, is the amount of 2 blocks, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's apparent there are a ton of 2 blocks, but like 2 blocks that you still want, and that is so different from a lot of other formats. And I think that it's kind of, especially in this one where you're kind of swinging with these big attacks and you're like really feeling those 2 blocks, right? So how would you compare heavy hitters to, formats in the past? Like you mentioned bright lights, and Outsiders, but, going deeper back, we had some more interesting ones. A lot of people look back on the Tales of Aria format very fondly. I don't know about Uprising, but then we got a little bit of Welcome to Wraith. But what are your thoughts on those older ones compared to heavy hitters where we're at now?
I think if I had to like combine 2 sets, I would say that heavy hitters would be the combination of Outsiders drafting process and gameplay of Monarch. Monarch, basically, anybody that's drafted Monarch quickly realizes that there's like a lot of bomb cards, right? There's like a lot of in-game variants. Now, in the eyes of somebody that's hyper competitive like myself, that's a bad thing, right? I want a situation that I can manage and like have the least amount of variance, but at the same time, those types of things are exciting.
Mm-hmm.
They're fun, right? So that's why like I understand that it's like not optimal for competitive play when something has increased variance, but I'm also able to cast aside my bias and say it's a fun way to play the game. It adds a lot of variety, different conclusions to games that are unexpected, which is exactly what you want in games when they're televised or broadcasted. In heavy hitters, this is seen by clashing or just power cards in general, and drawing and discarding with KO. You don't know what's going to happen. Whereas everything else, like in Outsiders, was kind of like really, in Bright Lights as well, it was really modular, right?
Mm-hmm.
You just, I know it's gonna happen. I'm gonna swing my dagger. I'm gonna play my 2 for 6 and like call it a day, right? It was just kind of like the same kind of play patterns. Where this one, it feels like there's a lot of variety into it, and it's exciting to play at the cost of introducing a little bit more variance, which is perfectly okay.
Yeah, I think I would agree with you there because, you know, the funny thing, you mentioned Clash, right? And I think Clash actually does add this like point of variance, but like it's not it's not variance for nothing. I think is like the weird thing
Hmm.
way to put it, right? Because there's things you can still gain from clashing, like losing a clash, right? That you
Hmm.
initiated. Now you know if you want to pop your gold, right? Now you know if I want like how I want to play out the rest of this turn. Now I know how my opponent's going to play out their turn because I now have information, right? So it's variance with like more information like known by both players. But if you feel like you're the better player, you can use that information better. So you're
Hmm.
almost hedging against that variance, which I think it was actually pretty brilliant by them to kind of do stuff like that. Now, you know, I do got to ask. We're starting to see the full exploration of overpower, right?
Yeah.
We saw it initially. I think it was like Dynasty, and we were like, okay, it's just where's dominate, and then we saw a little bit more of it, and now we've 2 sets in a row. I think Bright Lights really was like, hey, overpower is going to matter, and this is
Right.
another like, yeah, no, overpower is here to stay. Is this an appropriate fix to dominate because of maybe some of the feels bad to dominate? I think maybe they're trying to get rid of that. What do you think?
I think that dominate is very similar in like how it makes a player feel with like frostbites, right?
Mm-hmm.
And not just any frostbite, but like when you have one frostbite and like maybe you can't do like everything that you possibly would want to that turn, like that's okay. That's okay. It's okay to have that level of disruption. But like when you flip with Lexi a red Arctic Incarceration and play it and give your opponent 4 frostbites and they don't have a blue and they just pass with 4 cards in hand, that's not okay.
Yeah.
Right? That's like kind of like really unacceptable from a gameplay perspective. And I think overpower is like that type of tailoring. It's like, hey, we're gonna like give you a frostbite, but we're not gonna let you get 4 kind of situation. And so it's a little bit of disruption, but it's also giving you more avenues to play around it. Basically, just giving the player more agency on both ends of the board. And I think it's a great design mechanic. Same thing for block. I think it's actually fantastic to create cards that are quote unquote on the same level as like Sink Below, your 0 for 4s defensively, but you can't sit on them, right? So you don't have these like degenerate decks that just rotate them out of Arsenal and just block everything. And nobody wants to play a bunch of games like that. So great design for Overpower, 100%.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned like the block cards, and there have been some comparisons drawn between like Oldham and like Victor,
Mhm.
right? Victor's the new big bad guardian that seems to really block well. Clearly wants to block a lot with Clash cards. But
Mhm.
there's a real cost to playing Clash cards because guess what? Kano doesn't care about that,
Mhm.
right? So, do you think that is a better direction to go for like hero design too, when you're going to build something that has the potential to be oppressive, like we saw with Oldham in certain metas, to kind of like create mechanics that you can't have a super even matchup spread?
Yeah, I think it's a great direction for the game because when players first play against Victor, they might find it very frustrating because it's like, man, I throw something at him, he blocks 1 card, he gets the card back because he made a gold token, and he's like back to a 4 card hand. Did absolutely nothing. But I think the problem is the players aren't asking themselves, well, what if you didn't attack,
Mm-hmm.
right? And they just have that red card in their hand that they can't do anything with, right? So I think once players get more comfortable against that strategy and start saying, okay, I'll just block my whole hand out, set up something, maybe play a cast bone, something along those lines, and then really push damage on one particular turn, that's how you really take advantage of those types of strategies. The problem is if you have cards like Crown of Seeds, like Oldham did, that strategy doesn't really work because then they just rotate the arsenal and block with that additional card, right?
Yeah.
So I think they're doing leaps and strides as far as design and gameplay and kind of preventing those strategies.
Oh, absolutely. Now, back to draft now.
Mhm.
You know, you're playing at a decent amount. You're being successful with it, and I'm assuming there's going to be heavy hitters draft at LA.
Correct.
Yeah. So all that being said, right now, right, if you were to draft, if me and you were to hang up this podcast, go to our LGS together, somewhere in between Alabama and New Jersey, maybe Tennessee, which heroes are you prioritizing when you sit down, or are you not prioritizing any heroes?
It's not that I'm prioritize. So I think that the power level from like I don't like throwing out blanket statements like this because there's so much nuance. But I think the power level is Warrior, Brute, then Guardian.
Mm-hmm.
But like I said, there's a lot of caveats and like asterisks around that statement. The way that I approach the draft is I'm entirely willing to go into either Brute or Warrior, but I have to be sold on Guardian.
Okay.
So I just treat it like that. I'm like, I have to get very convincing evidence to hop into Guardian. And it really just revolves around the other two classes doing something a little bit more fundamentally powerful. Like, making might tokens regularly with KO or intimidate with Rhinar. And then, of course, you have attack reactions on the end of Warrior. Those are just very powerful things to be doing in that format, where Guardian can do powerful things as well. The problem is Guardian really only like excels when there's only two Guardians in the pod. If you get a third Guardian, it really falls apart really quickly because you don't have that density of 3 blocks to really execute your strategy.
Yeah, absolutely. So that being said, are you looking at the hybrid cards first, or are you more interested if are there cards that are the class specific that you're just like, okay, well, I got to take this even if I don't end up in that class early in the draft, of course.
In the draft, I mean, I'm always a fan of taking a brute / warrior card, like any of the agile wind up, lead with speed, any card like that, or wage agility. I'm a huge fan of taking those first because it leaves it open to be in the two most powerful classes. And, I have the ability to stay open. But then there's also some very powerful generics, like, Rally the Rear Guard, is something that can't be slept on. The ability to turn a 2 block into a 3 block is something that can't be, underestimated, and play around overpower as well. There are some bombs in the format, but I think this would probably be a great time to bring it up. I wanted to talk about Wild Ride, specifically the card. I think it's a card that is ruining a lot of people's drafts, because it's one of those cards that scales how good it is depending on how many other brutes there are. Right now, what do I mean by that? Well, we don't really see a lot of cards in Flesh and Blood that scale depending on the quality of your deck. It usually just does one thing, and it does like, a 3 for 7, right? It doesn't matter what the other 28 cards in your deck are, as long as you have a blue and you're 3 for 7, it's doing the same thing. It doesn't really scale. But Wild Ride depends so heavily on hitting. So if you ever draft a Wild Ride and then Brute gets contested, the value of that card quickly diminishes because the density of your 6s will be a lot lower. Therefore, you miss. Some people might say that that same theory would apply to Bare Fangs, but that's just not the case because there's not as much risk associated with Bare Fangs because you're not trying to continue your turn. If you miss on Bare Fangs, you miss out on 2 damage. Like, it sucks, but it's not just stopping your turn that you kept your whole hand for. So I think Wild Ride specifically is probably giving a lot of Brute drafters a problem because they're just seeing it and they're like, oh, go again,
Yeah, I mean, the upside there is there, but, it's tough, right? Because I don't think KO needs it as much, But if you end up trying to go Rhinar, I think Wild Ride can be. I mean, having the 2 claws is just pretty good. Well, hopefully claw on a ball breaker or something like that. Like then you're really off to the races. But it's pretty neat. Now, let's say the situation is you read your seat totally correctly, right? This could be you're one of the 2 guardians. This could be you're one of the 3 brutes or one of the 3 warriors. If you read your seat correctly, which hero do you think has the highest upside in Heavy Hitters limited format?
I would say it would have to be between Guardian and Warrior because, and I don't think I could differentiate between the 2 because I think the answer is just not Brute because there's a lot more variance built into the Brute game plan. So you could have like this amazing 1 of 2 Brute deck, but then the variance inside the game just not go your way. Either the Intimidates didn't line up with Rhinar, or you drew and discarded the wrong card with KO, whatever the case may be. There's just a lot more in-game variance, which can accidentally win you some games, but it can also accidentally lose you some games.
That's fair. And when the Guardian deck lines up, it is quite powerful too. So,
it is.
It's doing some of the, I mean, Betsy's overpower sometimes is almost unbearable, but
Oh yeah.
Now, before we get to some listener questions here, I was just, do you have any like quick tips? You mentioned the Wild Ride situation. Any quick tips or even warnings that you would just give to the buds when drafting this format? Like, someone says, "Hey Nathan, I haven't drafted this format yet. I know the cards or whatever. What's a quick tip or warning you would give me?"
I would reemphasize the Wild Ride situation. Only draft that card if you know Brute is uncontested, which means it's a riskier pick early. I would say that any card that has to meet a condition has to be very sparingly drafted. And what do I mean by that? I mean the Fatal Engagement, right, is a powerful card. But if your opponent knows that they don't have to worry about that if they don't block with an attack, it can present these situations where it gets stuck in Arsenal or, and it's an expensive card. So you not only have to present the opportunity, but then if they don't play around it, then you just have 2 resources there that are just wasted because now you can't even play it. Another one that comes to mind is there's a 0 cost. I forget the name, but it's a 0 cost reaction that can only be played on a wager card, right? Well, if you don't have a lot of ways to wager attacks, then that can be... It still blocks 3 and it's a reaction, so it's like not the most opportunity cost given, but it is something that you have to be aware of, and you might have to be like, oh, maybe I don't block with this card because I haven't seen this card yet. I need to be able to play it. So there's a lot of decisions like that. I think a lot of players are shying away from Rhinar, and I don't know if like everybody's just caught up on KO right now. Because he's like the talk of the town ever since Yuki won the Battle Harden. But like Rhinar's perfectly fine. If you just know how to line up the Intimidate, the yellow and red wind-ups, you can literally just intimidate on the fly.
Yeah.
I double intimidated 2 turns in a row against a 1 of Guardian and 3 of the pod. I mean, like, you just can't beat that in this game. And then the thing about this format is it's very hard to use 4 cards offensively. So the value of Intimidate is actually a lot higher than it is normally perceived. But the biggest tip that I could give any drafter in Heavy Hitters format is understand the token manipulation. And what do I mean by that? I mean, while your opponent has an agility token, can I wager an agility token? Because if you wager an agility token while they have one, you're not wagering anything. You're just presenting a non-hit effect, right?
Yeah.
There's no risk associated with it, right? And that seems very simple, but it goes deeper, right? Like when your opponent has an agility token, you then have an opportunity to present whatever on-hit effect, and it's more, you have the information that it's more likely to hit because they're trying to keep their cards to get value from that token. And as long as you know those things, so like I'll put like a wager card in Arsenal, like one of the 3-for-7s, and I'll just wait for them to make an agility token, and I'll be like, okay, here it is. If you block the 7, then you just don't get your agility token. So I'll win either way. Like, how do you want to do this? Whether it's waging agility or not, I'll wage anything. So I think token manipulation is a huge part of the format, but also use your equipment offensively. Don't be scared to. Pop those flat trackers, that vigor girth, whatever that makes the tokens, do it, especially when it allows you to block with your temper equipment.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Those are some great tips, and I'll be using them this weekend. Thank you, Nathan.
There you go.
We do have some listener questions. These all come from the Buds Discord. Great place to hang out. The first one comes from Sigma, who asked, as someone who never played a TCG before, how were you able to pick up the game and become so good at it? And then he also asked, do you feel people who play TCGs for longer have leverage over you, or if that experience makes them different players in the way that you think about the game, or they think about the game? Or do you have an upper hand from not having any previous bad habits in TCGs?
Right. I actually love that question. And as far as like why I'm good at the game with like little experience, I think a lot of it just boils down to, this. I've always had like a strategy mindset, played the strategy game. So it's really the same thing. You're just trying to look at a situation and find the best avenue, right? That's all cards. That's all TCG games. That's all it boils down to. It's just finding the best with what you have. And I think it just translates well with what I enjoy doing. I've also worked in the field of engineering, which is known for like high spatial intelligence, which is a very specific type of intelligence that, so I think I got a little lucky, got a good head on my shoulder for this type of thing. So I think a lot of it is probably just a little bit of natural talent, but also it just molded really well with what I previously had for hobbies, and it just kind of landed that way. As far as the habits end, I've definitely paid tuition. And what do I mean by that? I didn't top 8 nationals, the second U.S. nationals that Hamilton brought Bullander to, that one. I didn't top 8 because I did not pressure my opponent to play faster. I didn't know I could do that, right? Because I'd never been in that situation. And when I explained that to the buddies on the team, it was nothing malicious, by the way. The player that I was playing, they weren't like slow playing to draw the game. It was just I didn't do my part and like say, hey, we got to play faster, kind of remind them, kind of thing. And it cost me a top 8. I was at table 2, sitting right next to Michael Hamilton, and it ended in a draw, and that's how it ended. So there's been a lot of situations like that where I've had to quote unquote pay my tuition and learn those hard lessons that everybody else does. But that's a great point. I don't have a lot of the bad habits, right? I tend to have like a fresh view on a lot of things. Some of that can be in the form of inexperience, but some of it can just be like, never thought about that. And it does translate pretty well, I would say.
Yeah, great question, Sigma. Great answer, Nathan. Next question comes from Darth Prentice, a.k.a. Greg, who asks, what's your take on UPF? He can't recall hearing if you've played or not, or any alternate formats that you enjoy playing, etc. Commoner, Clash, Cube.
Okay, so as far as UPF is an interest, so I am a competitive player at heart. That's just what I enjoy the most. It's like, and it solely revolves around it's the most difficult, and I want to use my head, right? Like that's just how it is. But UPF, I love the idea of it, but there's something about it where the most optimal, I don't know if a lot of people know this, but the most optimal way to play any negotiation type game is to be in second for most of the game and then quickly take first at the end. Mm-hmm. That is the most optimum way to play that type of game. but my brain doesn't work that way. Like I said earlier in the podcast, I look at my hand and I want to do the most optimal thing I can. So if I build up this giant lead, everybody else just shits on me. And that's just how because they're supposed to. They want to win the game and I'm winning, so they try to take me down. And I'm just not a big fan of UPF because I have to go against every fiber of my being and intentionally play worse to win, basically. So UPF is not my thing. I've played a little bit of Commoner, not a huge amount. I love the idea of it. The fact that you can throw $15 at a deck, play, I love that idea, right? I'm definitely down to do those things. Just UPF is probably where I would have to draw the line, just because I'm not a big. But I've also never played Commander, so that might be maybe if I tried Commander, I would be like more susceptible to that type of game. Maybe, not sure.
Yeah, I mean, I'll tell you that it is. I never liked Commander. I'll play more UPF. I think it just flows a little bit better. But if you're not into Commander, or if you're not into UPF, you're not gonna be into Commander. That's for sure. So like, I understand exactly what you're saying. But great question, Greg. Next comes from Capolo, who asked, whenever a new set comes out, how do you manage your time of testing new heroes, testing old good heroes, or trying to break old heroes that have been powered by few expansion slot cards?
One thing that I'm really good at is not getting overly hyped. And unfortunately, as a content creator, that can kind of come off the wrong way. Like, I think I have quite the reputation of like just dogging on a new set, kind of as far as like power level goes or something. And that's not my intentions. I like to like look at something and like make it like really prove itself before I say it's like really good.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just the way that my brain works. And I really put things through the ringer on a theory basis before I actively like because theorizing is always more efficient in like the first part of any deck than actively playing the reps out, just because it takes simply more time. The problem is the worse you are at operating on theory, then you're going off in the wrong direction when you do finally build the deck and get paper reps in it, right? And I think that I just really excel in the theory part, and I probably could work on the other end. But I really just really make the new cards prove a point. I ask them, are they doing something that's undeniably, fundamentally powerful? And if the answer is no, it kind of gets just casted aside. I don't really go for the fancy stuff. Like, I had every reason in the world to think or hope that Vincent was the best thing on the block, right, when it came out. And I spent all of 2 weeks, like, nonstop, just trying to figure something out that worked. Because I was the Runeblade guy. People kind of expected it. Like, they were like, what's he going to come up with? He's going to get... And I came back and I was like, sorry, guys, she's bad. And everybody was like, no. Like, but I was like, it just is, right? I was able to find it very quickly, and I immediately just discarded it. And I was like, there's just something like fundamentally here. And yeah, that's just kind of how I do it.
Yeah, well, it's a great answer. Great question, Cap. Last question comes from the Stoop Kid, who so graciously left his stoop to ask this question. On the competitive side of Fab, there's a lot of niche interactions. How do you keep up with these to exploit versus or avoid being exploited by them?
I mean, everybody touches fire once, right?
Yeah.
I think that's what it boils down to is you really need to get enough reps. And it's not so like the more competitive you are, the more like different players and different decks you're exposed to. Like if you take like a casual player and they show up to their armory once every week, well, most people at the armory level typically stick with like one or two decks, right? They don't really. Most people at that level aren't like bringing something new every single week, right? So you're like when you finally do run into that Arachne player, you have no clue what's happening, right? You just don't even know what they're trying to do or accomplish. Or Riptide is a great example. Like so many people just don't have reps into it because nobody's playing him, and then you know you're a guardian, you sit across from him, and he just fatigues you because you have no clue what's happening, right? And I think that it's all about branching out, and then whether it be, of course, Tower Shar is a great resource, but just understanding the interactions and getting reps in. I wish there was like a better answer, but it really just boils down to that. It's just getting exposed to it the first, second, or third time.
Yeah. I mean, if people didn't learn from that stuff, Dorinthia would be the best deck ever.
Exactly.
You know?
Exactly.
So, yeah, great question, Stu Kid. And Nathan, thank you for coming on. This has been a lot of fun. You've been so insightful, so gracious to give us your time. You're a wealth of knowledge, and I hope that we can get you back on, down the road as well, and hopefully hang out at a tournament. We've been in a couple tournaments together at the same time.
Absolutely.
It's just never lines up because there's never enough time. But
Never is.
thank you again. Really appreciate it. Can you please plug everything you'd like to plug? And yeah.
Yeah. So obviously, member of the Card Guyz, we have a YouTube channel over there. I usually stream every week on Wednesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern. Usually run a stream over there for a few hours. Feel free to stop by. We have a couple sponsors, Dragon Shield, Magnolia Gaming, and Fabric.gg. Shout out to those for sponsoring the team and helping support us and get us to events. And then if you'd like to interact in any way, Nathan _ TCGZ is the Twitter handle. I'm going to keep calling it Twitter because I'm bad at habits and I just don't like X for whatever reason. So it's a Twitter handle. But anyway, that's where to find me. That's where I try to interact with the community the most. I don't think it's the best way of doing so. It just seems the easiest is the best way to put it. And yeah.
Convenience is a powerful thing. You all can continue to find me on Twitter at freshbudspod. I almost said something different. At freshbudspod. Check out the Buds Discord. It's all in the link tree below. YouTube, like, comment, subscribe. And then I also just recorded some commentary with Mo Bogsley for As Is Go Again Gaming, the league that means nothing. Hopefully that's out by now. I'm sending that over to him now. And then check out my indie game podcast I do with my cousin called Fresh Juice. All that information is in the show notes. And finally, Nathan, I like to talk about food at the end of every episode. We talked a little bit about before we even started recording, but what is something from Alabama that you really enjoy?
Just like classic Southern food, like macaroni and cheese, fried chicken, like can't go wrong, right? I mean,
no, you certainly cannot. Yeah. And I'm hungry again. I always do it to myself. Please, next time you see me, anybody out there, give me some mac and cheese. Unfortunately, we don't have time for Charmer. We ran out of time, but maybe we'll get to him next week. Thank you all, and stay fresh.